without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So today's theme is, this is traditionally the opening, the fall opening for the African American Studies program at the University of Florida. And the theme for today is when Black Studies was famous. So you can have all kind of theoretical and philosophical debates around just that central theme, right? Whether you want to debate about, well, I mean, when African American Studies was first created as a discipline, whether you want to talk about in California or in here at Florida, University of Florida, when it came through, it was famous because it was born out of protest, right? So one can make that argument. So many different angles that you can take it. So I know our director, our newly esteemed director, Dr. David Canton, is going to give us some insight into that. So prepare yourselves. But in the meantime, I want to go ahead and give the floor to Dr. Ashley Preston, so that we can do a tribute to our dearly departed colleague, Dr. Patricia Hilliard-Nunn.
Hi, everyone. I had to write this down because I was scared that I wouldn't be able to get through it if I didn't write it down. Never would I thought in a million years we'd be starting this school year without Dr. Nunn. All summer, we've been texting about the fall, what books we would use, how we look forward to the end of COVID. She was just so full of life. She was the first person that I knew that attended both Hampton and Howard University. I went to Howard. We both went to Howard. So we have a big rivalry between Howard and Hampton, but she went to both schools. So first person I know to do that. But she could do that because she was Dr. Nunn. She was a mother, a wife, a historian, a professor, an author, a producer, and a curator. And she lived life with such zeal. Her smile was infectious, and she was an all-around beautiful soul. She made all of us, students, colleagues, friends, she made us all feel like we were her favorite people. She had a way of remembering to always ask those important questions. She would ask about my son by name, and she would always request updates on his health. Dr. Nunn, she just knew. She was special like that. I've only known her for a few years, but I know a few things to be true for sure. She loved her community. She was a passionate educator and historian, and the world was made better by her presence. And the African American Studies program will miss you, Dr. Soror Hilliard-Nunn. And I just want to say that after she passed, one of her colleagues, someone she went to school with at Hampton that I knew in the film world, he called me up and he said, I cannot believe I forgot to tell you to meet Dr. Nunn. When I knew you were going to UF, I should have told you to connect with her. And I said, I know Dr. Nunn. And he started talking about how they were in school together at Hampton. And he said, one of the things that he said that I won't forget is he said, she was always so ahead of her time. She was just, even then, we knew she was going to be great. We knew she was going to great places. And he said she would kind of keep them in line. And so I was reading back through my text messages, and one of the things that he said in the message was she was a bridge builder and a bridge crosser. Dr. Nunn, I'm sad that we're not here, that she's not here with us, but we're going to make this year and every year after this great in her honor, because she was so committed to the work here at UF. And I'm just grateful that I got a chance to meet her and to work with her. And I pray that her spirit lives on. So I just wanted to say before we go on, if we could just take a few moments of silence in honor of Dr. Nunn. Thank you all.
Thank you, Ashley, for that moving tribute. She will definitely be missed, and as you said, we will continue on in her honor. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and turn the floor over to Dean Richardson. So Dean Richardson, you have the floor.
Thank you, Vince, and good afternoon, everyone. I just have a few minutes. I'd like to talk about some things that are on our mind and on my mind about the African American Studies program, its future. And also, I'd like to start with a few words to follow on Ashley's moving tribute to Patricia. Some time ago, maybe a couple of years ago, we had an event at the Keene Faculty Center here, back when we used to all meet in a room together. And at that time, I asked for the UF academic community, the folks who were gathered there, and anyone else listening, to help us move African American Studies from a program to departmental status. And that is one of the significant goals, top goals of my time here as dean. There's no doubt about it. At the same meeting, I remember a wonderful historical overview that was given by Dr. Hilliard Nunn. And, you know, I saw firsthand there the kind of eloquence, humor, directness, and knowledge that she brought to everything she did. And we were so fortunate to have her in our college. I do miss her directness and her passion for African American studies. She always wanted us to do things right. She always wanted us to be successful. And she always wanted us to try harder. And she's right. We always need to be trying harder. She was a model for all of us. I also noted that at that same event that our first job was to seek a new director for African American Studies. So we set out and did a national search to find someone who could guide the program to departmental status. We needed that kind of leadership. We needed that kind of drive and ambition, just like Professor Hilliard Nunn displayed. We ultimately were assisted in this process by one of the most noteworthy academic leadership search firms in the country. And they did a tremendous job of assisting us in identifying outstanding candidates. And we are pleased to be able to introduce Dr. Canton here in just a few minutes. Before that, however, I just wanted to give you a sense of what's going on in the college and the university and how it may come to bear on our efforts here today. And the bottom line for us going forward with African American Studies is that we hope that the impact of everything that we are experiencing in this year will only serve to move us more quickly toward our goal. So what are some of the observations I would make about UF and higher education right at this moment? Well, let's talk about higher education. It is undoubtedly going through the most ambitious experiment ever undertaken by the entirety of American higher education. And, you know, we have two goals: keep everyone safe, and at the same time, provide for their progress academically. And many of you here today have participated in one way or another with that, and I'm very thankful for the efforts on both of those goals that you have made. At the same time, as we deal with the pandemic, the murder of Mr. Floyd has sparked a movement that was a long time in the coming. It was in the making for so much longer than that, but it finally seems that we have a commitment, both at institutions of higher education and in the majority of the population of this country, to turn the page on racial justice and racial relations in this country. And I am so pleased that while unfortunately it's coming at the latter half of my career, I am getting to see it. And for that, I am very thankful. The question for us is, what is our role in writing that new chapter? What will that look like? Well, there's a lot of thought out there. There's a lot of opinion. There's an incredible amount of effort going into this. I believe, in promoting the future of African American studies here, are doing one of the most important tasks that we can take on to promote quality and effectiveness as this country moves in its new direction and writes this new chapter. There's also another issue lurking, which we are concerned about. I know that the administration of the university is also concerned about, and that is that this pandemic has also led to some stumbles in the economy. And in particular, this situation has had a profound impact economically on many of those who are least able to deal with the economic fallout. So we have to respond to that as well. The state budget is threatened because of reduced revenues, and this in turn may mean that our university will take more budget cuts in the year ahead. So we ask ourselves, you know, how do we respond to that? As we get to go back to the pandemic for a moment, like other universities in the country, we experienced a surge in COVID cases at the beginning of at the convergence of thousands upon thousands of students here in Gainesville to become residential students. And the good news is that despite that surge in cases, we do know that the vast majority of our students and our staff and our faculty are acting incredibly responsibly. And for that, we appreciate their efforts. It seems, as I sit here right now, that the surge in cases has come to an end. It's not growing. And in fact, there are early signs that cases for UF-affiliated students are beginning to decline. We have challenges ahead, but so far our plan seems to be good in terms of the campus. There are no cases or I should say there is no evidence that anyone has contracted COVID by participating in normal campus operations. So I'm proud of all of you for your concern for your fellow UF Gators. We have to be patient. There are those who would love to see this come to an end soon, but the experts are telling us it could be some time. That being said, I'm incredibly optimistic that we're going to get better and better at this and learn to live with the pandemic. So let's move on to the question of the economy and how it might impact what we would want to do as a university. The answer that I give to all of you here today is that the college, despite the economic concerns, remains absolutely unwavering in its commitment to progress in the African American Studies program. You already know about the space improvements that have been done. There are more to come in order to increase our ability to add faculty to the program. We remain committed to a cluster of tenure track faculty lines in African American Studies. And we are also committed, when we can, to hiring in other units of the college in positions for faculty with skills that will also contribute to progress in African American Studies. And finally, the economy it has not slowed down the university's investment and commitment to expanding the role of artificial intelligence in our curriculum, providing new curricular and training opportunities for our students and our faculty and our research and teaching. And I am actually very committed to making sure that the University of Florida, through our college's efforts, will not produce technology alone, but yet rather will produce technology that serves everyone in society and does not discriminate against minorities, but rather helps lift them up. I hope that this is going to be an historical year. In fact, to the theme of the day, the fame of Black studies at UF will only grow from here. And so please continue your efforts as we seek to move African American studies into its new chapter and its given greater fame. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce David Canton. Dr. Canton is an historian who is tenured in the Department of History here. He comes to us after a remarkable and successful career at Connecticut College. And he, by the way, has done exactly what he said he would do. He's hit the ground running. We are all so very pleased to have Dave Canton here in our college. So David, the Zoom room is yours.
Thank you very much, Dave. There's a lot of Daves in the CLAS. We have to figure it out, but appreciate it. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Ashley, my esteemed colleagues. And as Dave said, I came and hit the ground running. So what I'll do is I have a talk I put together here, and I appreciate you coming out on a Friday. I know if it wasn't COVID, it was happy hours. You'll still show up to hear me speak on Friday, or we hope. But, and if you want to put stuff in the chat room, go ahead. So I have a Q&A after, and I'm gonna go ahead and just read the documents. In 2019, Michael Harriot, a journalist for The Griot, created the term hashtag Black famous. He defined Black famous as the gap between Black stardom and white anonymity. For instance, the highest possible rating on the Black famous scale would be someone every Black person knew, but was unknown by every white person. Now, we all know these are exaggerations, but you will get his point in the next few minutes. For example, most Black people, let me unpack Black people, those who have been socialized in African-American context, have heard of Frankie Beverly and Mays' classic song, Before I Let Go. For the uninitiated, Beyonce remade the song with the HBCU band in Homecoming, a tribute to HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. Remember, she asked you to turn and kick and slide, bunny hop, drop. Yes, that song. But the original version of the song is played at every Black cookout and adult day party. Here's another classic, Cameo's Candy. One can hear this one at every Black wedding, and you know what follows next, the electric slide. Here are some other hashtag Black famous celebrities. Phyllis Hyman, her white famous doppelganger, Whitney Houston. If you saw School Days, she was the woman who sang in the gym. Stephanie Mills, who played Dorothy on the Broadway version of The Wiz. Her white famous doppelganger, Diana Ross, who played Dorothy in the 1977 film version of The Wiz, a hashtag Black famous movie, due to Ross's connections to Motown founder Barry Gordy. And Howard Rollins, a Black actor who played Captain Davenport in the 1984 film A Soldier Story, his white famous doppelganger, Denzel Washington, who was in the movie, were all hashtag Black famous individuals. I have a colleague at UConn, and every year he asks his students who saw Love Jones or Boys in the Hood. And every year, most all white students saw Boys in the Hood, and not one student saw Love Jones, another classic Black famous film. Let me be clear, I am not taking away from the immense talent of Houston, Ross, and Washington. My point is, I speculate that the majority of you who have heard or recognized a song or film by the aforementioned hashtag Black famous individuals are African American, and I bet the majority of you who have never heard of the other performers are not African American. At the very least, African Americans who are too young can contact someone in their family right now, and they will say, what you know about Phyllis Hyman, Stephanie Mills, and Frankie Beverly. One can see this similar phenomena in academia and in the world of ideas. Prior to the 1960s, the overwhelming majority of Black scholars were hashtag Black famous. They taught at historically Black colleges and universities, published in Black journals, spoke at Black schools, churches, and libraries. White professional organizations such as the American Historical Association and the American Bar Association prohibited African American historians and lawyers from membership. So Black scholars and other Black professionals created their own professional organizations, such as the National Association of Colored Graduate Nurses, founded by Martha Franklin in 1908, the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History, founded by Dr. Carter G. Woodson in 1915, and the National Bar Association, founded by George Woodson in 1925. Woodson and Woodson, they're not related. The Great Depression, Black and labor activism, the rise of Nazism in Germany forced philanthropic organizations such as the Julius Rosenwald Foundation and General Education Board to invest in Black PhDs. According to James Whitman's Hitler's American Model, the United States in the Making of Nazi Race Law, the Germans used United States Jim Crow and anti-miscegenation laws to create the Nuremberg laws in Germany. Nazism is American racism on steroids, and many white liberals must have concluded in order to avoid what occurred in Germany and to force this nation to live up to its principles, education would be the method to improve race relations. After World War I, there was an increase of Black college graduates, and by the 30s and 40s, an increase in Black PhDs. Between 1840 and 1943, there were 381 Black doctorates. But between 1930 and 1943, 316 African Americans have received their PhD. So basically 25 a year for 13 years from 1930 to 1943. During the 30s and 40s, white Northern universities started to hire Black faculty as adjunct instructors. For example, in 1937, the City College of New York hired Max Yergin, who became the first African-American to teach at that school, and he taught the course Negro History and Culture. 5 years later, the University of Chicago hired W. Allison Davis as the first full-time tenure-track professor in a white university. Now, he was hired in the education department, even though his PhD was in anthropology, and he had co-authored 2 major works, Deep South and Children of Bondage. Davis received tenure in 1947, the same year Jackie Robinson desegregated Major League Baseball. This is why I refer to Davis as the Jackie Robinson of academia. Black scholars remained Black famous. However, between 1945 and 1946, 23 African Americans have received the tenure track position and 27 have received a temporary appointment at a white university. In 1945, Adelaide Cromwell was the first Black woman hired to a full-time tenure track at Smith College, an all-female liberal arts college in Massachusetts. During the 60s, Southern white universities started to hire Black faculty. Between 2018 and 2020, hundreds of Afro-American, Black, African-American, Africana, African-American studies, programs, institutes, and departments held golden anniversary celebrations. These celebrations highlighted the origin stories of the discipline, progress, challenges, and the intellectual impact of African-American studies in the university and local communities. African-American studies is a discipline that teaches the same skills, critical reading, writing, and thinking as in other disciplines. Black studies is not a hobby designed to appease angry Black students or just to hire a few Black faculty. During the late 60s, Black students and faculty understood African-American studies must become a department in order to address institutional racism in the academy and the world. Black faculty and students recognize departments provide tenure track appointments, which leads to power and administration positions. African-American studies is a discipline born of struggle, and over the last 50 years, the discipline has developed a number of schools of thought: the African-centered, Afrocentric, African-American, Black feminist, Africana womanism, Black radical tradition, and areas of concentration, such as hip-hop studies, Black queer studies, Black male studies, Black code studies, Black girlhood studies, and African-American studies textbooks and readers. The question is, what was Black intellectual life prior to the creation of the first Black Studies Department in 1968? Who and what was a Black public intellectual when Black studies was Black famous? The answer is very simple. It was Black scholars, community, and progressive allies such as Herbert Aptheker, a historian who had the courage to listen and respect Black excellence. It was transnational and unapologetically Black. They researched issues on class, gender, transnationalism. Black African scholars, intellectuals, and artists created and owned their own peer-reviewed journals, such as Phylon, the Journal of Negro Education, and newspapers, Chicago Defender, organizations, American Negro Academy, HBCUs, Atlanta University, Howard University, Fisk University, and of course, I gotta shout out Morehouse College. Due to heavy teaching loads, most Black scholars did not have time to publish. In fact, most white faculty members did not have time to publish. But the few Black scholars who managed to write more than one monograph includes historian Dr. Helen Edmonds at North Carolina Central, sociologist Oliver Cox, Lincoln University in Missouri, and Benjamin Quarles at Morgan State University. All three published classic works, but Cox and Edmonds have remained #Black famous. Quarles published 10 books, and with John Hope Franklin were white famous Black historians. I am writing a biography on Lawrence Dunbar Reddick, a Black historian and part of Carter G. Woodson's Black history movement. Reddick, born in 1910 in Jacksonville, Florida, received his BA in history and MA in education from Fisk University. Black historian John Hope Franklin and Reddick were members of Fisk University's debate team. In 1939, Reddick received his PhD in history from the University of Chicago and was the 15th African American to accomplish that task. Reddick was part of the Black history movement, and his career was a model for Black studies. Oftentimes, Reddick was referred to as an activist historian, scholarship and service, the root of Black studies. The beauty of Black studies, Black famous, is it is not a top-down affair governed by precocious academic elites. However, let's be honest, Du Bois admitted he had difficult times relating to the masses, but as he got older, he viewed the limitation of the talented 10th and realized there are more talented Black folks that meets the eye. But I am convinced Du Bois was still not going to a juke joint for entertainment or a hole in the wall to make an order and get a to-go plate. If you are laughing at this last sentence, you recognize two terms you hear in the Black community. A hole in the wall is a restaurant, store that may have one or two chairs and plenty to take out, and a to-go plate is styrofoam, foil, and 2 paper plates. Black Studies, Black Famous is a town and gown communal event where people of African descent from a variety of backgrounds participated, who contributed to producing, maintaining, and disseminating Black knowledge. Black Studies, Black Famous is transnational, Pan-Africanist. Many African Americans or Africans in diaspora participated in reading groups, collected books by people of African descent, and joined a number of political organizations. Most of you are familiar with Arturo Schomburg, mother from St. Croix, and dad was German, was one of the most famous bibliophiles in history. He worked at the library at 135th Street in Harlem, and the Carnegie Foundation gave him $10,000 and purchased his collection, which one can still see in the Schomburg collection in Harlem. In 1911, Schomburg and John Edward Bruce, a Black journalist, had created the Negro Society for Historical Research 4 years before Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History in Chicago. Charles Blockson, a Black bibliophile from Pennsylvania, is famous for the Blockson collection at Temple University, and I've had the privilege of meeting Dr. Blockson. Librarians such as Dorothy Wesley Porter and Black school teachers and activists played a central role in the collection and dissemination of information about Blacks in the diaspora. When Black Studies was Black Famous, they had their own journals, magazines, and other venues to share their message. One can start with slave narratives, Freedmen's Journal, the first Black newspaper in the United States, and a long history of newspapers such as the Chicago Defender and Philadelphia Tribune, which I can say without any hesitation, the majority of individuals on this Zoom have not read, but all of you have heard or read the New York Times and Washington Post. There were popular magazines that combined history, news, and current events such as Ebony and Jet, Black-owned publishing houses such as Woodson's Associated Publishers, Haki Madhubuti in Chicago, Third World Press, and Black Classic Press in Baltimore, Maryland, founded by Paul Coates, Ta-Nehisi Coates' father. Black Studies, Black Famous scholarship describes, disrupts racist scholarship while it creates and develops alternative visions of Black life. Historians have examined Black student protests at predominantly white and historically Black colleges and universities, and this scholarship has created a master narrative in the history of African American studies. Consequently, most students are familiar with the 1968 Black Studies Department origin story at San Francisco State University, the Black student boycotts and demonstrations at Ivy Leagues and other predominantly white universities, the creation of the first PhD program in African American studies at Temple University, and the quote, legitimacy, air quote, of African American studies due to the rise of Black public intellectuals, i.e., Black faculty in African American studies programs at Ivy League schools who had access to major white-owned media outlets such as the New York Times, Washington Post, National Public Radio, The New Republic, CNN, and MSNBC. Henry Louis Gates, Harvard, Cornel West, Harvard, Michael Eric Dyson, who's at Georgetown, taught at the University of Pennsylvania, Melissa Harris Perry, who was at Wake Forest, was at Princeton, Eddie Glaude, Princeton, Mark Lamont Hill, who is now at Temple, but taught at Columbia. Trisha Rose, Brown University, Imani Perry at Princeton, and Jelani Cobb at Columbia. In 1989, Malefia Sante created the first PhD program in African-American Studies at Temple University, a public university in North Philadelphia, which made it Black famous. Since 1968, there were Black Studies majors, institutes, programs, and departments across the nation, but no PhD programs. In 1991, Harvard University hired Henry Louis Skip Gates, who was charged to improve Harvard's African-American Studies department. In 1972, Harvard had an Afro-American Studies department, but by the 90s, it was struggling. In January 1995, Michael Berube wrote an article in New Yorker titled Public Academy. In March of 95, Robert Boynton wrote an essay for the Atlantic Monthly titled The New Intellectuals. And a month later, Adolph Reed Jr. wrote What Are the Drums Saying Booker T. Washington in the Village Voice. According to Jonathan Holloway, the first Black president at Rutgers University, these three essays focused on what he refers to as a crisis canon, but all three essays state Black scholars are focused on representation, responsibility, and expectation. Reed's essay was critical of Gates and West, and he warned Black public intellectuals of the pitfalls of the double audience phenomena where Black thinkers will solely serve to provide the white community an executive summary of Black life. Double audience meaning Black famous, white famous. Hashtag Black famous, Black studies is not a few Black scholars at Ivy League institutions translating Black life to white audiences. For example, this is how Black folks eat, walk, talk, and think. Black Americans, we are just like you. Do not be scared. As soon as Gates and Harvard jumped on board the Black Studies debate reached white-owned major media outlets such as Time Magazine and the New York Times. For example, during the 90s, many people were introduced to the Egyptians Black debate, but Black writers and thinkers addressed this issue during the 19th century. Stephen Hall's faithful account of the race, African-American historical writing in 19th century America. In 1817, Jacob Olson, a Connecticut minister and school teacher, wrote a 12-page pamphlet titled A Search for Truth, an inquiry for the origin of the African nation, and challenged the racist interpretation of the Old Testament origin of Black folks. The first issue, the Journal of Negro History, appeared in January 1916, 4 months after Woodson founded the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History. In fact, in our office, we have every edition of the Journal of Negro History from 1916 to 1970, an excellent primary source on Black studies. In the inaugural issue of the Journal of Negro History, Monroe Work's essay was titled The Passing Tradition of the African Civilization. Work could not read the Kemetic ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics, but similar to other 19th century Black intellectuals, he used the Bible and Greek and Roman primary sources to prove the ancient Egyptians were Black, or for a more precise term, because race did not exist, the ancient Egyptians was an African civilization. Please read Samuel Huntington, Clash of Civilizations, as he defined the term, what makes a civilization. Culture is what separates human beings. Work, Woodson, and others knew that ancient Egypt was an African civilization. However, for more evidence, please read the Senegalese scholar Sheikh Anta Diop's work, the Congolese scholar Theophile Obenga, and my late great friend Troy Allen. Read his book, The Ancient Egyptian Family Kinship and Social Structure. He argues ancient Egypt was a matrilineal society, which makes it an African civilization, because in European societies, all European societies are patrilineal, descent through the father. During the 90s, the buzzword in higher education was multiculturalism. Why? In 1992, the Rodney King Rebellion in LA was televised. White conservatives believed multiculturalism was the end of Western civilization and the Western canon. During the 2000s, diversity and inclusion were the new buzzwords. Why? Demographic change in the US, there are more Black and brown babies being born in this country, and the increased size of the Black middle class of academics and politicians. In 2020, in response to the murders of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, the new term now is anti-racist scholarship. Here we go, another new buzz term, anti-racist scholarship, but I have a solution to solve all these new terms. How about Black Studies, Black Famous? In 2014, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who Toni Morrison referred to as the next James Baldwin, took the literary scene by storm. Nicole Hannah-Jones, a journalist of the New York Times and editor of the New York Times 1619 Project, won a Pulitzer Award. And of course, Abram Kendi, historian and creator of the anti-racist scholarship, are the new Black public intellectuals. Why? They have access to white-owned media and a hashtag white famous. While I applaud all of their success, the downside is any Black scholar who is critical of the aforementioned Black scholars are viewed as haters rather than a scholar who is stating the obvious. We have been down this road before. Coates and Jones have talked about reparations, but this is not new. In Black Studies, we will talk about Callie House, a Black woman in Nashville who talked about reparations for former slaves after the Civil War. The National Council for Black Reparations was created in 1970s. Randall Robinson, founder of Trans Africa, discussed reparations in the 90s. These are Black Studies, Black famous individuals. Since the inception of the first PhD program in African American Studies, higher education has reinvented, renamed, and remixed terms for diversity. If universities agree to support Black Studies and require students to include Black Studies, not a diversity course in general education, we would not be in this situation. However, many in academia still think there should not be a required Black Studies Gen Ed course. But this is the same person who's in his feelings like a Drake song after the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. In 2020, people are saying we need to study systemic racism. How about the slogan, more students should major and take courses in Black Studies that examine, guess what? Systemic racism. However, if we say we need an anti-racist or diversity gen ed course, everybody will be on board. Why? Because anti-racist studies is the new white famous buzzword. It is like what Malcolm said, adding more milk, Black studies to, adding more milk, anti-racist studies to Black coffee, Black studies. Black Studies, Black Famous is not a buzzword-driven discipline. The talk to you today was sponsored by over 30 years in Black Studies teaching and scholarship. Black Studies majors will be introduced to hashtag Black Famous scholars, artists, books, and music, and will have the skills to critique and recognize the limitation of Black intellectuals who most whites think speak for Black folks. In other words, if Nicole Hannah-Jones wrote the same 1619 project in a Black newspaper, her work would have remained hashtag Black famous. The African American Studies program at the University of Florida is based on a Black Studies hashtag Black famous paradigm that examines an intellectual tradition created by and for Black folks to solve not only African American problems of the African American community, but of the nation and the world. I would like to leave you with this quote from Afrofuturist author Octavia Butler from her book, In Order for a Phoenix to Rise from its Ashes, It Must First Burn. I realize I don't know very much. None of us knows very much, but we can all learn more. Then we can teach one another. We can stop denying reality or hoping it will go away by magic. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Dave. Thank you. Very powerful presentation and reading. And so with that being presented, we're going to go ahead and open up the floor. If you can type in the chat box your question, and then I'll moderate it. And so any questions for Dave with that wonderful presentation? questions, general questions regarding the presentation or the vision for the program that Dave has for it. Go ahead. If you could type it in the chat box, because I can't see everybody's Brady Bunch squares. It's 3 pages, so if we could type it in the chat box, that would be perfect. And then I'll just read the questions as they come in. Okay, so Dr. Henry asked, can you speak on Marcus Garvey and Ethiopianism?
Oh, great question, right? So obviously we know Marcus Garvey, born in Jamaica, right? And if you read his work by Tony Martin, right? He traveled to Panama, London, United States, and he realized wherever he went, Black folks were at the bottom. So for him, you know, the racial differences made no sense. Obviously in Jamaica, being a dark-skinned man, you know, the colorism was an issue. He was a fan of Booker T. Washington, came to the States, but when he got here, Booker T. Washington died. So for Garvey, Ethiopians, in that old verse out the Bible, Ethiopians should stretch out our hands out to God, some of that nature, but people like Edward Wilmot Blyden was part of that tradition. So for Garvey, you know, that connection there with Ethiopia, recognizing that the Ethiopian origins of humanity, East Africa, in that nature. So, you know, Garvey's also part of his Black studies tradition. The Negro World had a French, Spanish, and English Pan-African edition, right? Black businesses, you know, so he's a major part, oratory speaker. You go to Harlem, speaking on a soapbox. You know, you see that in Harlem, Philadelphia, and Chicago. So again, that's when you have Black studies being inclusive. It's never been just the intellectual affair, right? Hubert Harrison, a lot of non-degreed, J.A. Rogers, Claudia Jones, Trinidadian journalists, has contributed this massive amount of information that needs to be disseminated to our students, because the arguments that be made by Black public intellectuals and winning these book awards, not knocking it, but there's a wealth of knowledge. And when you start reading the Negro Digest, you're like, wait a minute, this sounds familiar. That's the point I'm making. You know, that's why this discipline is so important, and for students to hopefully major and be part of this.
All right, thank you, Dave. So the question was, are Black Studies courses part of Gen Ed at University of Florida now? I can answer this. I actually sit on the General Education Committee, serving with Dr. Angela Linder. She's the one that is over the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences for the Gen Ed. I actually sit on the committee. And yes, we have a number of courses that are part of the Gen Ed requirements. One of them is Introduction to African American Studies. The courses that I teach, Black Masculinity, which I'm teaching right now, and also The Wire is also a part of the general education, or has received the general education designation. Dave is also working on a Quest course. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but he's also working on a Quest course that will also for Gen Ed requirement. So
I'm doing a Why Sports Matter, you know, so again, the history of Black athletes and protests, you know, we go back to Harry Edwards or, you know, Jack Johnson. And again, so students, you know, you see someone on ESPN thinking it's new stuff, you come through here, like we've been there, done that. That's why, again, why discipline is so important.
Right. So, and other courses that count for Gen Ed as well as are the Introduction to African American Studies, and also the Black Atlantic Thought, I think counts for Gen Ed requirement as well. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong. So those are our main courses for Gen Ed, but we also are working to get more of our courses pushed through the Gen Ed curriculum. So. All right, so the next question is by Sophia Cord. What kind of undergraduate research experiences would you like to see at UF in Black Studies?
Good question. I think really the question is what students want to research, right? All research projects driven from your interests, not our interests, right? I'm 52 years old, but what do you want interested in with Black Studies is the question. Twitter, media, the whole AI thing, the boundaries have been stretched so far in the last 50 years. So whatever you think of it, you can research it. So whether it's social media, history, sociology, health disparities, educational gaps, wealth gaps, it's out there. So I think the better question is, what would you as undergrad, what are you interested in? Come do the major, get the training, then you're ready to go out there and make a difference in this world. And you will get the training in terms of the names I mentioned becomes part of your, as Greg Card Howard said, your intellectual genealogy, right? That knowledge is built on. There's no new name. We build on each other. So you go to like in American history, there's this assumption that someone's coming out with some new stuff. The reality is you're building on other knowledge and ideas. And that's why I like to put in my classroom. This has been and always will be a community affair, Black Studies. That was the nature behind it, where it's not just academics, it's community folks, preachers, everyone, because as we notice, Black people has full strength and everybody's on the same page. That's just the history of it. This cannot be done by just Black carpenters, Black academics. Black Studies, as we know, was through this communal affair. And even in 2020, it still takes that pressure from the outside to get what needs to get done.
Thank you. All right, so the next question is from also from our esteemed colleague, now retired, but Dr. Gwendolyn Zahara Simmons. And she asked the question, what in your view is the role of Black Studies and the critical need for Black folks to develop Black power?
Okay, it's a great question. In fact, my wife knows Dr. Simmons' daughter. I used to be a filmmaker back in Philly when I was in grad school. But anyway, how you doing? Right, so I just think what I've noticed is that we have this whole woke phenomenon. And the challenge is that for a lot of our students who are woke, it's like an elementary wokeness, right? Because they haven't done a deep dive into this material. That's why, again, why this major is so important, in that it provides you the intellectual foundation, whether it's art, music, history, sociology, so you'll be more informed, you get engaged in these debates. It also shows the depth and diversity in our community. Just like I said, I'm gonna unpack Black, because for a long time, we said the Black experience, like there was just one. The reality is you have multiple experiences. And I'll give you my example. My parents from the West Indies. I never heard of homecoming, collard greens, grits. Some folks want to take away my Black card. I never knew, because in the Caribbean, we didn't do grits. So that's why in my talk, I said those who were socialized, African-American context. So I went to Morehouse. That's when I got introduced to, Southern or African-American cultural traditions. So I think for the students, for them is to take these classes, let this form this foundation and inform their work and inform their passions. I think that's the key. This discipline will provide that. And I don't care if you're gonna go in Silicon Valley, Facebook, I don't care what career you pick. This is the knowledge that will help sustain you, help protect you, help you get through those moments when, racism raises ugly head in Silicon Valley. You have the knowledge and the confidence and the skills on how to thrive.
We may have lost our host.
I'm sorry.
Here he is. Oh, okay, he's popped back on. All right.
Here we go.
All right, sorry about that. Okay, so back to the group chat. You could go ahead and read it, Dave. It's fine.
I got you. From Kimberly Hill, your opening descriptions comparing hashtag Black famous and white famous in pop culture, excellent examples I plan to use with students. Do you have suggestions for explaining the significance of hashtag Black famous figures missing in U.S. history lessons? That's a great point. Because if it's not a required course, U.S. history course will have what I call the 12 famous Black people, the white people. Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, Martin Luther King, the other 9 others. That's why they have required courses. In a Black Studies course by itself, I can go Black famous. Phyllis Hyman, Stephanie Mills, Chester Himes. You see, we can go a deep dive into these folks who don't have the opportunity to become white famous because there's not enough room. I mean, that's just the reality, folks, right? It's almost like there's Coates, there's Kendi, it's only allowed for one at a time, but there's brilliant Black people like Ishmael Reed for years, literary genius, but he doesn't get that shine. So that's why you have African American Studies history courses by themselves to do a deep dive into these individuals. So again, I'm not knocking what Nicole Hannah-Jones does, but I think for many whites, they think this one person can speak for 40 million Black people. We don't do that to white people, right? You ask John Meacham, he talked about presidential history, that's it. You ask the other guy, they talk about one thing. No one Black person knows everything about Black people. That's insulting, you see? So that's why we have separate courses to do a deep dive, no different in US history, right? If this professor does New Deal, that's all they do. New Deal, that's it. You ask them to go Great Depression, they're offended. All they do is New Deal. We wanted Black studies to have the same respect, or when you see these folks on New York Times, go in the back of your head, that's one person's perspective, there's 10,000 others, and you're gonna learn about them in Black studies. Let's see, the Dr. Gordons, how y'all doing? Do you feel that Black studies, Black scholarship must necessarily be diluted if it is dispersed to a wider audience, that is by scholars having access to the white media? No, I don't think it's diluted. It's like I said before, I think, well, let's take that back. It depends who the scholar is. It depends who the scholar is. Some would say Gates' interpretation of American history, progress, you know, it's not so bad, it's okay. That's one interpretation, right? The other argument is that if I have an alternative interpretation, can I get the same access to the New York Times? That becomes a debate. Gates is not a historian, but they keep calling him historian. So he must be saying something that population finds okay, right? So the whole thing with anti-racist studies, wow, there's something that's great, which is fine, but I know some Black scholars that are really critiquing Kendi's work don't get the access to the New York Times, to the Atlantic, to the New Republic. It's just like Black films, right? Black films where Black folk murder one another, we know Boys in the Hood. Love Jones, most white people never see it. So it's all about fair and balanced representation. So I think I encourage white allies who read Kendi and others, open yourselves up to other scholars, and they represent just one perspective. They don't speak for every African American. So when you read that Kendi book, hey Dave, did you read Kendi? And I come off side eye, don't get mad at me. I got other perspectives out there, right? So I think we see that with Coates, but I don't think it's diluted, some would argue, but I think at the same time, the person that gets access, maybe because, let's be honest, you know, all that attention, all that money, all that gold, maybe sometimes you might make some double audience shifts, you see, but all I'm saying, let's just have balance in the discussion. And for my white academics, always remember that's just one perspective, like a Black film, like Blackish, that's one person's interpretation of their experience. That's a great question. You know, yeah. Tomorrow I'm going to answer. I'm not going to lie. The next question. Okay, Yawande. Hey, what's going on? You know, my colleague, Greg Carr. In your approach to leading African-American studies at UF, what's the strategy for keeping a strengthened Black studies focus without adding too many valuable but new related articulations? Anti-racism, multiculturalism, diversity, and inclusion. How do we balance the coffee to cream ratio? We just call it what it is, right? In this program, right, it's going to be focused on the perspectives that I mentioned, okay? And that for us, diversity, inclusion, anti-racism, multiculturalism, we're going to call it like we see it. In other words, you didn't need multiculturalism when you had Black studies in the 90s. So they just constantly find new terms, which ultimately creates almost like a cottage industry, and you have Black scholars in departments who don't get access to that industry. Then when you look at the industry, why is that word multiculturalism, anti-racism, diversity, and inclusion more appealing than saying what it is? White supremacy, racism, institutional inequality. We have to ask that question. But that's how it's going to be studied in this department and program. We'll acknowledge those terms, but we'll even debate multiculturalism when that started in the 90s, and what was that about? So I like that question, but I think for Black studies, staying focused on target to what we do and not being pushed by buzzword trends, right? The next person that comes out, we need to follow that. No, stay consistent on it because all that stuff is being examined right now in the program. Cheryl Brown, class of 73, appreciate it. As an undergraduate, I was a student of Dr. Foreman in the program, okay. Okay, there you go, shout out, Love Jones, okay, I see you. See, again, everything's exaggeration. See, that's why I always balance, right? Balance, all right, good job. All right, how can community organizations like UF Associate of Black Alumni and Black Films Matter connect? That's a great question. We need to do a Zoom, Brother Aaron. I'm here 1 month on the job, so that'd be great. I mean, I'm big into films. My wife's a filmmaker. She's teaching Roxana Walker Canton and, you know, Learning Tree, Daughters of the Dust. You know where I'm going with it, so definitely we should connect and have a film festival when COVID ends, because films is always a great way to teach and learn. And particularly what I find, even now with Spike Lee's films, I realize how much older I am. You know, a lot of them haven't seen Bamboozled or School Days or Do the Right Thing or Daughters of the Dust or Sankofa, Holly Jarima's great stuff. So we should have a film festival highlighting those classics. And as a Black Studies major, those things should be part of your dialogues. Just like I gave you the Black famous stuff, right? Frankie Beverly and Mays. Every discipline has cultural, social points and connections. So when you leave Black Studies, you might not have seen Learning Tree, but you heard of it. When I say Phyllis Hyman, you heard of her, right? When I say Commodores, before Lionel Richie went solo, you know the Commodores. Yeah, I see people laughing at that one, right? You see? There you go, you know, right? For Dr. Gordon, what plans do you have for including Black achievers in science, medicine, engineering? Oh, without a doubt, right? We know with Hidden Figures, look, the bottom line is, we know there's been Black scientists and STEM folks for years. This whole AI initiative is an opportunity to blend the STEM with the humanities. My daughter's a PhD student in kinesiology, where she's big on humanities, social science, and combines it with the STEM. And she explains how, you know, it's challenging because her colleagues don't have the social science background. So for me, it's all the same, right? So if I'm through Black Studies teaching STEM, why is there underrepresentation in the STEM field? I don't say somehow Black people are lazy, don't have values. I know the systematic inequalities. That's what we learn here. Then the next thing is, how do we teach these students math? It's not genetics. It's, do we relate? I ran into a PhD student. She's working on programming to help create math problems using what students know. And I think that's the challenge, right? Dakita, I forgot her last name. She's one of Juan's students. So again, she's creating a program where she's developing math problems based off one's cultural background, which makes sense, right? Just look at the SAT. I'm from the Bronx. I don't know a regatta. What are you talking about? I take the train. They don't ask about the number 2 train, rotis and patties and pizza. They're asking about regatta in Paris. What do I know about that? Because we know culture and knowledge is specific to one's race, class, and other stuff. So I think now with Black Studies, we're uncovering that objectivity never existed. Knowledge is based on culture and perspective, and through training, discipline, mentoring, empathy, all people can succeed. And that's the nature of Black Studies. I want this department to be HBCU-ish, right? Where you come in, that's, you know, mentoring, you know, this is the hub for any professor who wants to, you know, some information for students. I don't care what discipline you in. I don't care if you're 3rd generation, rich and Black. I don't care if you're from the cut. I don't care if you're from Nigeria. This is the spot where we do this work.
Dave,
yes.
it's 5:15.
Okay.
So,
I'm over here, brother. I need my, wait a minute. I got my, wait a minute, bang.
I got you. So I know the program was from to 5:15. We could go all night, but we want to make sure that we're cognizant of people's times. So with that said, any last words, Dave, before we go ahead and wrap things up?
Well, I appreciate everybody coming out on a Friday, and just stay tuned. We have some events planned. We have Sophia Noble coming October 7th, author of Algorithms of Oppression. We got Anthony Jack, does work on First Generation. So please check in Check our webpage, stay up with what we're doing. Because as we know, the more support we have, the more we get things done here as a case to state legislators, because we're still, why they need Black studies, but the more we're involved, we know there's power in numbers. That formula is not changed and it's not gonna change anytime soon.
All right, perfect. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming out. As Dr. Canton said, that we will be having more programming like this in the future, starting with the Sophia Noble event, and we look forward to seeing you guys then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great job, Vince.